In a chilling case that shocked the nation, a former prison guard trainee committed a horrific crime, taking the lives of 5 women at a Florida bank. What led to this tragic event? Who was the man behind this senseless violence, and what happened in the aftermath? In this video, we'll uncover the story of a promising career turned dark, the devastating impact on the victims and their families, and the justice system's ultimate decision. Stay with us till the end so you don't miss any valuable information. Zefin Xaver's story begins in a way that might seem unremarkable to anyone on the outside looking in. Born in 1997, Xaver grew up in Indiana, spending most of his life in the Midwest before relocating to Florida. His family described him as quiet and introverted, someone who kept to himself and rarely opened up about his feelings or struggles. Despite his reserved nature, there was little indication early on that his life would take such a dark turn. As a young man, Xaver harbored an interest in law enforcement and corrections, which led him to pursue a career as a prison guard. He enrolled in training at the Avon Park Correctional Institution in Florida, where he was taught the skills and discipline required for a job in the corrections field. This line of work, while demanding and often stressful, offered stability and a sense of purpose. On the surface, Xaver seemed to be taking steps toward building a career and a future. However, beneath the exterior of a young man striving for professional success, troubling signs began to emerge. Former classmates and acquaintances recalled that Xaver had always exhibited peculiar behavior. He was known to be socially isolated, rarely forming close friendships or engaging in meaningful conversations with others. While this introversion might not have raised alarms on its own, it became clear over time that Xaver's isolation was accompanied by deeper emotional struggles. Reports from those who knew him during his training period suggest that Xaver often displayed an unsettling fascination with violence. He reportedly spoke of wanting to hurt others, made dark and inappropriate jokes, and had a morbid curiosity that unsettled those around him. His peers noticed, but many dismissed his comments as strange rather than serious. Unfortunately, no one acted on these red flags, and Xaver continued his training without significant intervention. In December 2018, just weeks before the horrific events in Sebring, Xaver abruptly resigned from his position at the correctional institution. The reasons behind his departure remain murky, though it's believed that he struggled to adapt to the demands of the job. Some speculated that his resignation might have been linked to personal difficulties or a lack of emotional resilience, as the job's stressful environment can take a toll even on the most composed individuals. After leaving the training program, Xaver appeared to drift aimlessly, lacking direction or a clear sense of purpose. His mental health seemed to deteriorate further, with no job prospects or strong support system to ground him. Family members later admitted they were concerned about his behavior, but did not anticipate the extent of his internal turmoil. Adding to the complexity of his psychological profile, Xaver's social media presence hinted at a fascination with firearms and violent ideologies. He frequently posted cryptic messages and shared disturbing imagery, including references to mass shootings. These posts painted a picture of a man who was deeply troubled, grappling with thoughts that would soon manifest in unspeakable violence. The trajectory of Xaver's life, from a quiet childhood to a young man struggling to find his place in the world, was one marked by missed opportunities for intervention. His story is a stark reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing warning signs before they escalate into tragedy. By the time he entered the SunTrust Bank in Sebring, armed and intent on causing harm, the transformation from troubled individual to mass murderer was complete. The seeds of violence had been sown long before that fateful day, growing unnoticed until they culminated in an act of unthinkable brutality. On the morning of January 23, 2019, the SunTrust Bank in Sebring, Florida, opened its doors like any other day. Located in a quiet community known for its relaxed pace and scenic surroundings, the bank was a routine stop for many residents. The staff and customers inside had no reason to expect anything unusual that day. But as the morning progressed, the calm atmosphere would be shattered by an act of unimaginable violence. Zefin Xaver arrived at the bank armed with a 9mm handgun. His exact motivations remain unclear, but it is evident that he came with a plan to inflict harm. Wearing dark clothing, he walked into the bank shortly after 12:30 p.m. and ordered everyone inside to lie down on the floor. His demeanor was cold and deliberate, giving no indication that he was acting impulsively. This was a premeditated act of violence. Once inside, Xavier's actions were swift and brutal. He began shooting indiscriminately, targeting the 5 women inside the bank. Each shot was fired with precision, leaving no chance for his victims to escape or survive. Witness accounts and later forensic evidence revealed that he executed the women in a manner that suggested he had thought about this moment in advance. The victims were powerless against his sudden and overwhelming violence. As the shots rang out, the scene inside the bank became one of terror and chaos. Some of the victims were employees of the bank, going about their normal workday, while others were customers who had come to conduct routine business. None could have anticipated that their lives would be ended so violently and abruptly. Outside the bank, the situation quickly escalated as local authorities were alerted to the unfolding crisis. Xavier himself made the chilling 911 call to report the crime. In a calm voice, he informed the dispatcher that he had shot multiple people inside the bank. His tone lacked remorse or emotion, as if he were simply reporting a routine event. The call further highlighted the cold and calculated nature of his actions. Law enforcement responded rapidly, surrounding the bank within minutes of receiving the call. The scene became a flurry of activity as officers tried to assess the situation. Initially, it was unclear whether Xavier intended to take hostages or if there were any survivors inside the building. Officers attempted to communicate with him, urging him to surrender peacefully and release anyone who might still be alive. Xavier, however, showed no willingness to cooperate. For over an hour, he remained holed up inside the bank, refusing to negotiate or provide any information about the condition of those inside. The standoff created an atmosphere of tense anticipation, with officers unsure of what they would find when they eventually breached the building. Finally, after extended efforts by law enforcement, Xavier surrendered. He exited the bank with his hands up, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Officers quickly secured him and entered the building, only to confirm their worst fears. All 5 women inside the bank had been killed. There were no survivors. The aftermath of the shooting left the small community of Sebring reeling. News of the tragedy spread rapidly, and the names of the victims began to emerge. Cynthia Watson, Marisol Lopez, Deborah Cook, Anna Pignon Williams, and Jessica Montague. These women, beloved by their families and friends, had been taken in an instant, leaving an irreplaceable void in the lives of those who knew them. The scene inside the bank was described as horrifying by those who investigated it. The evidence of Xavier's cold execution-style killings was undeniable. Crime scene photos and forensic reports painted a grim picture of a man who had acted without mercy or hesitation. For the residents of Sebring, the events of that day were more than just a shocking crime. They were a profound betrayal of the peace and safety the community had always known. In the days and weeks that followed, the town came together in mourning, holding vigils and memorials to honor the lives of the 5 women who had been so senselessly taken. The SunTrust Bank remained closed for weeks, its doors marked by flowers and handwritten notes from community members expressing their grief and support for the victims' families. As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement and the media sought to understand why Xavier had chosen to target the bank and commit such a horrific act. Yet the answers proved elusive. The randomness of his actions only deepened the tragedy, leaving a community struggling to find meaning in an act that seemed devoid of any rational explanation. Xavier's transformation from a quiet, reclusive young man to a mass murderer remains one of the most haunting aspects of the Sebring tragedy. To understand the man behind the crime, it's essential to examine his background, personality, and the potential triggers that may have contributed to his violent actions. Born in 1997, Xavier grew up in Plymouth, Indiana, a small town where life was generally uneventful. He was the son of divorced parents, and while his upbringing was not marked by significant financial hardship or abuse, it was not entirely stable either. Those who knew him during his early years described him as an introverted child who preferred solitude over social interaction. He struggled to connect with peers, often appearing awkward or uncomfortable in group settings. As he grew older, Xavier's social isolation became more pronounced. In high school, he had few close friends and was largely ignored by his classmates. Some peers recalled that he exhibited strange behavior, such as laughing at inappropriate times or making unsettling comments. But few saw these as warning signs of deeper issues. He was often described as a loner, a label he seemed to embrace rather than resist. Teachers noted that he was an average student, showing little enthusiasm for academics or extracurricular activities. While many teenagers experienced periods of self-doubt and isolation, Xavier's struggles appeared to go deeper. He developed a fascination with violence, which he expressed through his interests in online activity. Xavier frequently played violent video games and consumed media that glorified aggression and destruction. Though it is crucial to emphasize that such interests are common and do not inherently lead to violent behavior, in Xavier's case, they seem to feed into a growing fixation on causing harm. In his late teens, Xavier began to exhibit signs of serious mental health issues. His family and acquaintances noticed changes in his demeanor, including increased irritability, mood swings, and episodes of apparent detachment from reality. He reportedly struggled with feelings of rejection and inadequacy, though he rarely spoke openly about his emotions. These struggles were compounded by his inability to form meaningful relationships, leaving him without a strong support system to help him cope. Xavier's decision to pursue a career in corrections appeared to be an attempt to find direction in his life. In 2018, he enrolled in training at the Avon Park Correctional Institution in Florida. The program offered him structure and the potential for a stable career, but it also placed him in a high-stress environment that may have exacerbated his underlying issues. Working in corrections requires resilience and emotional regulation, qualities Xavier seemed to lack. He struggled to adapt to the demands of the job, and his performance was reportedly unremarkable. During his time at Avon Park, Xavier's fascination with violence became more evident to those around him. He made disturbing comments about wanting to harm others, though his colleagues and trainers dismissed these as dark humor rather than genuine threats. Some speculated that he was trying to appear tough or desensitized, traits often valued in the corrections field. Unfortunately, these red flags were not taken seriously, and Xavier continued his training without intervention. In December 2018, Xavier abruptly resigned from his position at the correctional institution. The reasons for his resignation remain unclear, but it is believed that he struggled to handle the pressures of the job. His departure marked the beginning of a period of aimlessness and isolation. Without a job or clear purpose, Xavier retreated further into his own world, spending long hours alone and disengaging from the few social connections he had. Around this time, Xavier's online activity became increasingly troubling. He posted cryptic messages on social media that hinted at his inner turmoil and fascination with mass shootings. These posts included references to past tragedies and images that glorified violence. In hindsight, they appear to be cries for attention or validation, though at the time they went largely unnoticed. Family members later revealed that they were concerned about Xavier's behavior, but felt unsure of how to address it. His mother, in particular, recognized that he was struggling with mental health issues and urged him to seek help. However, Xavier resisted these efforts, insisting that he was fine. Like many people with untreated mental illness, he appeared to lack insight into the severity of his condition. In the weeks leading up to the Sebring shooting, Xavier's behavior grew more erratic. He seemed agitated and disconnected, though he gave no specific indication of what he was planning. Those around him could sense that something was wrong, but the true depth of his instability remained hidden. One of the most chilling aspects of Xavier's profile is the apparent lack of a clear motive for his actions. Unlike many mass murderers, he did not seem to be driven by ideological beliefs, personal grievances, or a desire for revenge. Instead, his crime appears to have been an expression of his inner turmoil, a desperate and violent attempt to gain control or make his mark on the world. This absence of motive makes his actions all the more terrifying, as it underscores the unpredictability of such violence. Xavier was a deeply troubled individual whose struggles went unaddressed until it was too late. His story highlights the importance of recognizing and responding to warning signs, particularly when they involve a fascination with violence or expressions of hopelessness. While it is impossible to say whether intervention could have prevented the tragedy, the missed opportunities to address Xaver's mental health issues and growing instability remain a sobering reminder of the cost of inaction. The investigation into the Sebring bank shooting began immediately after Zef and Xaver surrendered to law enforcement. As the horrific nature of the crime became evident, the authorities were tasked with piecing together a comprehensive account of what had happened, and more importantly, why. The case posed significant challenges due to the sheer brutality of the killings, the lack of a clear motive, and the methodical manner in which Xaver carried out his attack. The first step for investigators was to secure the crime scene. Officers entering the SunTrust Bank were met with a devastating sight. 5 women had been shot and killed, their bodies lying on the floor where Xaver had ordered them to remain before executing them. Forensic teams meticulously documented the scene, taking photographs, collecting physical evidence, and mapping the trajectories of the bullets. Each piece of evidence was crucial in reconstructing the sequence of events inside the bank. Ballistics analysis played a significant role in the investigation. The 9mm handgun Xaver used was recovered at the scene, along with spent shell casings and bullet fragments. Forensic experts determined that the weapon had been legally purchased, raising questions about how someone with Xaver's troubling history was able to obtain a firearm without raising red flags. This finding would later reignite debates about gun control and the need for stricter background checks. The victims' autopsies provided further insights into the crime. Medical examiners confirmed that all 5 women had been shot at close range, with injuries consistent with execution-style killings. The deliberate and methodical nature of the shootings suggested that Xaver had planned the attack in advance. This finding contradicted any notion that the crime was a spur-of-the-moment act of rage or desperation. Investigators concluded that Xaver had entered the bank with the specific intent to kill. Law enforcement officials also turned their attention to Xaver's digital footprint. His phone, computer, and social media accounts were analyzed to uncover any clues about his motives or state of mind leading up to the attack. What they found painted a disturbing picture of a man consumed by violent thoughts. Xaver's social media posts included references to mass shootings and imagery that glorified violence. He had also conducted online searches related to firearms, mass killings, and other dark subjects, indicating a preoccupation with the mechanics and aftermath of such events. The investigation extended to Xaver's personal history, with detectives interviewing his family, former classmates, coworkers, and acquaintances. These interviews revealed a consistent pattern. Xaver was described as a loner with few social connections, a man who struggled with mental health issues and seemed increasingly detached from reality. Several individuals recalled unsettling comments he had made about wanting to harm others, though none of these statements had been reported to authorities prior to the shooting. The lack of action on these red flags became a point of discussion in the aftermath of the tragedy. The 911 call Xaver made immediately after the shooting became a key piece of evidence. In the call, Xaver calmly admitted to killing the women inside the bank, providing his name and location. The lack of emotion in his voice was chilling and provided further insight into his state of mind. He seemed detached from the gravity of his actions, offering no explanation or justification for the killings. The call was a stark reminder of his calculated approach to the crime. As the investigation progressed, authorities worked to identify the victims and notify their families. This was a heartbreaking task, as each notification brought unimaginable pain to the loved ones of the 5 women. The victims were identified as Cynthia Watson, Marisol Lopez, Deborah Cook, Anna Pignon Williams, and Jessica Montague. They were mothers, daughters, friends, and colleagues, each with unique stories and vibrant lives that were cut short. The investigators' commitment to honoring their memory became a driving force behind their work. The community of Sebring played an active role in supporting the investigation. Residents provided information about Xaver's recent behavior, as well as their observations from the day of the shooting. Local businesses and organizations offered assistance, donating resources and hosting events to support the victims' families. The outpouring of support underscored the deep sense of loss felt by the entire community. As the investigation neared its conclusion, prosecutors began building their case against Zover. The evidence was overwhelming. Physical evidence from the crime scene, forensic analysis, digital records, and Zaver's own confession all pointed to his guilt. The prosecution's goal was not just to secure a conviction, but to seek justice for the victims and their families. One of the enduring challenges of the investigation was the absence of a clear motive. Zaver offered little insight into why he chose to commit such a horrific act, and investigators found no evidence to suggest he knew any of the victims personally. This lack of a motive added to the tragedy, as it left the victims' families and the public struggling to make sense of the senseless. In the end, the investigation into the Sebring bank shooting was a painstaking effort that brought together law enforcement, forensic experts, and the community. While it could not undo the devastating loss of 5 innocent lives, it provided a clear and undeniable account of what happened that day. It also highlighted the urgent need for better systems to identify and address individuals like Zaver before they commit acts of violence. The lessons learned from this investigation continue to resonate, serving as a somber reminder of the work that remains to be done to prevent such tragedies in the future. The tragedy of the Sebring bank shooting is most poignantly felt through the stories of the 5 women who lost their lives that day. These women, each with unique and vibrant lives, were loved deeply by their families and friends. They were not just victims, they were mothers, daughters, friends, and colleagues. Their lives were intertwined with the Sebring community, and their loss sent ripples of grief and heartbreak far beyond the walls of the SunTrust Bank. Cynthia Watson was a dedicated bank employee, known for her warm smile and professionalism. She had worked at SunTrust for several years, becoming a familiar face to customers and colleagues alike. Her friends described her as dependable and kind-hearted, someone who always went out of her way to help others. Cynthia was a mother and a grandmother, fiercely devoted to her family. She loved spending weekends with her grandchildren, cherishing every moment with them. Her loss left a void not only at the bank, but in the lives of her loved ones, who struggled to comprehend how someone so full of life could be taken so suddenly. Marisol Lopez was another beloved employee of the bank. She was known for her upbeat personality and infectious laughter that could light up any room. Marisol had a deep love for her family, particularly her children, who were her pride and joy. She worked tirelessly to provide for them, balancing her demanding job with her responsibilities at home. Friends and coworkers remembered her as a ray of sunshine, someone who could find humor even in the toughest situations. Her tragic death was a devastating blow to her family, who described her as the glue that held them together. Deborah Cook, a longtime resident of Sebring, was one of the bank's loyal customers. She had come to the bank that day to take care of routine business, unaware that it would be her last visit. Deborah was known in the community for her generosity and kind spirit. She was active in local charities and frequently volunteered her time to help those in need. Her friends described her as selfless, always willing to lend a helping hand or a listening ear. Her unexpected loss left a profound impact on the community she had served so faithfully. Anna Pignon Williams was a devoted wife and mother with a passion for helping others. She worked at a local healthcare facility and was deeply involved in her church, where she played a significant role in organizing community events and outreach programs. Anna's faith was a cornerstone of her life, and she was known for her unwavering optimism and compassion. She had stopped by the bank that day on an errand, a simple act that placed her in the path of tragedy. Her family, including her young children, were left grappling with an unimaginable loss, their lives forever changed by her absence. Jessica Montague was a newer employee at the bank, having recently joined the team. She was eager to prove herself and had quickly earned the respect and admiration of her coworkers. Jessica was a young mother, deeply devoted to her children and her husband. She balanced the demands of work and family life with grace, often speaking about her dreams for her children's future. Her life was just beginning to blossom, filled with plans and aspirations that would now never be realized. Her family was left to mourn not only her death, but the unfulfilled promise of her future. In the days and weeks following the shooting, the Sebring community came together to honor the lives of these women. Vigils were held outside the bank, with hundreds of residents gathering to pay their respects. Candles, flowers, and handwritten notes covered the steps of the building, a testament to the deep sense of loss shared by everyone in the small town. Stories of the victims' kindness, resilience, and love were shared, painting a vivid picture of lives that had touched so many. For the families of the victims, the grief was all-encompassing. Each family faced the heartbreaking task of planning funerals, saying goodbye to their loved ones far sooner than they ever could have imagined. Their grief was compounded by the senselessness of the crime, as they struggled to understand why their loved ones had been targeted in such a brutal and random act of violence. The loss was not just an emotional burden, but also a practical one, as several of the victims had been primary providers for their families. Community fundraisers and donations poured in, offering some measure of support, but the void left by their absence could never be filled. The legacy of these 5 women continues to resonate. Their lives were marked by kindness, dedication, and love, and their loss serves as a painful reminder of the fragility of life. Efforts to memorialize them include scholarships, charitable events, and community programs created in their honor, ensuring that their stories will not be forgotten. The tragedy of their deaths has also sparked broader conversations about safety, mental health, and the need for vigilance in recognizing warning signs that could prevent future acts of violence. Though the lives of Cynthia, Marisol, Deborah, Anna, and Jessica were tragically cut short, their memory endures in the hearts of those who knew them. Their families, friends, and the Sebring community continue to cherish the moments they shared, even as they grapple with the pain of their loss. Through acts of remembrance and efforts to create positive change, these women's legacies shine as beacons of hope and resilience in the face of unspeakable tragedy. The trial of Zephan Zaver for the Sebring bank shooting was one of the most anticipated legal proceedings in Florida's recent history. It represented not only a quest for justice for the 5 women he murdered, but also an opportunity to examine the legal and societal failures that allowed such a tragedy to occur. From the moment Xavier was arrested, the legal process was under intense scrutiny, with the victims' families, the Sebring community, and the broader public demanding accountability. Following his arrest, Xavier was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The severity of the charges reflected the premeditated and brutal nature of the killings. Prosecutors faced the daunting task of building a case that would deliver justice to the victims' families while navigating the complex legal and emotional landscape surrounding the case. While Xavier had confessed to the crime, the trial was expected to delve deeper into his motivations and state of mind, with the potential to influence sentencing and broader discussions about accountability. The initial hearings were marked by heightened security and widespread media coverage. Xavier appeared in court looking emotionless, his demeanor chillingly detached from the gravity of the situation. His lack of visible remorse became a focal point of the proceedings, as it underscored the calculated nature of his actions. The courtroom was often filled with the victims' family members, who displayed a mix of sorrow and quiet determination as they sought justice for their loved ones. The emotional weight of their presence was palpable, a constant reminder of the human cost of Xavier's actions. Prosecutors wasted no time presenting the overwhelming evidence against Xavier. They laid out a timeline of the events leading up to the shooting, supported by forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies. The prosecution argued that Xavier had meticulously planned the attack, arriving at the bank with a firearm and executing the women in a manner that left no doubt about his intent to kill. His calm and deliberate behavior during the crime, as well as his chilling 911 call admitting to the murders, left little room for interpretation. The defense, meanwhile, sought to focus on Xavier's mental state, arguing that he suffered from severe mental health issues that impaired his judgment. They presented evidence of his troubled past, including his social isolation, fascination with violence, and struggles with depression. The defense team called mental health experts to testify, painting a picture of a young man who had spiraled into a state of emotional and psychological turmoil. They argued that while his actions were undeniably horrific, they were rooted in untreated mental illness and not pure malice. Despite these arguments, the prosecution countered by emphasizing Xavier's calculated actions and the lack of any meaningful attempts to seek help for his mental health struggles. They pointed out that Xavier had legally purchased the firearm used in the crime and had shown no hesitation in carrying out his plan. The prosecution argued that his actions demonstrated a clear understanding of right and wrong, undermining the defense's claims of diminished responsibility. The trial also included powerful testimony from the victims' families, who shared their grief and the devastating impact the crime had on their lives. Their statements were filled with raw emotion, painting vivid pictures of the women who had been taken from them. They spoke of the love, laughter, and joy their loved ones had brought into their lives, as well as the immense pain of losing them so suddenly and violently. These testimonies served as a poignant reminder of the human cost of Xavier's actions, moving many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the evidence against Xavier was overwhelming. The defense's arguments, while compelling, did little to counter the undeniable facts of the case. The jury deliberated for a relatively short time before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. The announcement of the verdict was met with a mix of relief and sorrow from the victims' families, who expressed gratitude for the justice system while acknowledging that no outcome could ever truly heal their wounds. With the guilty verdict secured, the trial moved into the sentencing phase. This stage of the proceedings was equally emotional, as the court considered whether Xavier should receive the death penalty or life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors argued that the severity and premeditation of the crime warranted the ultimate punishment, while the defense pleaded for leniency on the grounds of Xavier's mental health struggles. The sentencing phase included additional testimony from both sides. The prosecution presented evidence of the pain and suffering inflicted on the victims and their families, emphasizing the need for accountability and deterrence. The defense, meanwhile, called on mental health professionals and members of Xavier's family to plead for mercy, arguing that his life should be spared in recognition of his psychological issues. In the end, the judge handed down the death penalty, citing the premeditated and heinous nature of the crime as justification. The decision was met with a mixture of reactions. For the victims' families, it was a moment of bittersweet closure. Justice had been served, but their loved ones could never be brought back. For the Sebring community, the sentence represented a measure of accountability and a reminder of the importance of vigilance in addressing warning signs before they escalate into tragedy. The trial of Xavier was not just a legal proceeding, but a deeply emotional and symbolic event. It highlighted the fragility of life, the devastating consequences of unchecked mental illness, and the urgent need for systemic changes to prevent similar tragedies. While the verdict and sentence provided some measure of justice, the true cost of Xavier's actions could never be fully measured, as the lives lost and the pain endured by the victims' families could never be undone. The trial served as a stark reminder of the importance of addressing the root causes of violence and supporting communities in the wake of unimaginable loss. The sentencing of Xavier was one of the most emotionally charged moments in the aftermath of the Sebring bank shooting. After being found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder, the court turned its attention to determining the appropriate punishment for a crime so heinous that it had shaken not just the Sebring community, but the nation as a whole. The question was clear: should Xavier receive the death penalty or be sentenced to life in prison without parole? The sentencing phase of the trial was deeply emotional, as it required the court to weigh the severity of the crime against the defense's arguments about Xavier's mental health and troubled background. For the families of the victims, this stage of the legal process was both a continuation of their pursuit of justice and a painful reminder of the loved ones they had lost. Each hearing, each testimony, and each argument brought them face to face with the details of the tragedy that had irrevocably altered their lives. During this phase, prosecutors presented a compelling case for the death penalty, emphasizing the premeditated and execution-style nature of Xavier's crimes. They reminded the court that Xavier had entered the SunTrust Bank armed and with the intention to kill, methodically executing 5 women who posed no threat to him. The prosecution highlighted the deliberate cruelty of his actions, pointing out that he gave no consideration to the humanity of his victims or the devastating impact his actions would have on their families. They argued that the death penalty was not only warranted but necessary to send a strong message about the consequences of such calculated and senseless violence. To strengthen their case, prosecutors called on the victims' families to share their experiences of loss and grief. These victim impact statements were some of the most powerful moments of the sentencing phase, as loved ones spoke directly to the court about the pain of losing their mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. They described the lives their loved ones had led, the joy they had brought to those around them, and the deep void left in their absence. Many family members spoke of sleepless nights, broken families, and the lingering trauma of knowing how their loved ones had died. These statements underscored the profound and far-reaching consequences of Xaver's actions, leaving no doubt about the severity of the crime. The defense, meanwhile, pleaded for leniency, arguing that Xaver's actions were a result of severe mental health issues and a deeply troubled psyche. They presented evidence that he had suffered from depression, isolation, and a growing fascination with violence in the years leading up to the shooting. Mental health experts testified that Xaver's psychological struggles, combined with the lack of support and intervention, had contributed to his descent into darkness. The defense team argued that while his actions were inexcusable, they were also indicative of a system that had failed to provide the help he needed. They asked the court to spare his life, suggesting that life in prison without parole would be a more appropriate punishment that would allow for the possibility of rehabilitation, however remote. The courtroom became a battleground of conflicting emotions. On one side, the victims' families and the prosecution demanded the ultimate punishment for a crime that had shattered so many lives. On the other, Xaver's defense team and some advocates for criminal justice reform urged the court to consider the role of mental illness and the broader systemic failures that might have contributed to the tragedy. The tension was palpable, as everyone present understood the gravity of the decision the court was about to make. When the judge announced the sentence, the room fell silent. Xaver was sentenced to death, a punishment reserved for the most egregious crimes. In delivering the sentence, the judge spoke of the calculated and heinous nature of Xaver's actions, noting that the cold and premeditated manner in which he had executed the 5 women left no room for leniency. The sentence, the judge said, was a reflection of the immense harm Xaver had caused and the need to hold him fully accountable for his actions. For the victims' families, the announcement of the death sentence was met with a mixture of emotions. Some felt a sense of relief and justice, believing that Xaver's punishment matched the enormity of his crime. Others expressed more complicated feelings, acknowledging that while the sentence brought a measure of closure, it could never bring back their loved ones or erase the pain of their loss. Many family members spoke of their hope that the sentence would serve as a deterrent to others, preventing future tragedies and saving lives. The sentencing also reignited broader debates about the death penalty and its role in the American justice system. Advocates for the death penalty pointed to the Sebring case as a clear example of why the punishment exists, arguing that certain crimes are so egregious that they warrant the ultimate sanction. Opponents, however, raised questions about the morality and effectiveness of the death penalty, as well as the challenges of addressing mental health issues within the criminal justice system. Xaver's case became a flashpoint for discussions about accountability, rehabilitation, and the balance between justice and mercy. In Sebring, the community reacted to the sentence with a mix of relief and sorrow. The tragedy had left deep scars on the small town, and while the death sentence brought a sense of resolution, it also underscored the permanence of the loss. Memorials and tributes to the victims continued, as residents sought to honor their memory and support their families in the long process of healing. For Stefan Xaver, the death sentence marked the final chapter in his trial, but not the end of his legal journey. As with all death penalty cases, the sentence triggered an automatic appeals process, ensuring that the case would remain in the public eye for years to come. This process, while a necessary safeguard, also meant that the victims' families would have to endure further reminders of the tragedy as the appeals played out. Ultimately, the sentencing of Stefan Xaver was a moment of profound significance, not just for the victims' families, but for the entire community of Sebring. It represented the culmination of a long and painful legal process and the beginning of a new chapter in the journey toward healing. While no sentence could ever undo the harm caused by Xaver's actions, the decision to hold him fully accountable offered a measure of justice and a reminder of the resilience of those left behind. The legacy of the Sebring Bank shooting continues to shape conversations about justice, mental health, and the ways in which society can work to prevent such tragedies in the future. The Sebring Bank shooting left a profound and lasting impact not only on the small Florida community, but also on the broader public, prompting important conversations about violence, mental health, and community safety. The ripple effects of the tragedy extended far beyond the courtroom, touching on societal issues and sparking changes aimed at preventing such senseless acts of violence in the future. One of the most immediate and visible legacies of the shooting was the way it united the Sebring community in mourning and healing. In the days following the attack, the town came together in an extraordinary display of solidarity. Vigils were held to honor the 5 women whose lives were taken, with hundreds of residents attending to light candles, pray, and share memories. Flowers, cards, and messages of support were left outside the SunTrust Bank, turning the site of the tragedy into a makeshift memorial. For many, these acts of communal grieving provided a small measure of comfort in the face of overwhelming loss. The shooting also sparked a renewed focus on workplace safety, particularly in industries where employees interact with the public. Banks and financial institutions across the country began reassessing their security protocols, looking for ways to better protect employees and customers. In Sebring, local businesses partnered with law enforcement to conduct safety workshops, teaching employees how to respond in the event of an active shooter situation. While these measures could never erase the trauma of the SunTrust attack, they represented a collective effort to ensure that such a tragedy would not happen again. At the state and national levels, the shooting reignited debates about gun control and the need for stricter background checks. Zephan Zaver had legally purchased the 9mm handgun used in the crime, despite a history of disturbing behavior and mental health issues. Advocates for gun reform pointed to this case as an example of the gaps in the current system, arguing that more comprehensive background checks and mental health screenings could have prevented Xavier from obtaining a firearm. While no major legislative changes occurred immediately after the shooting, the incident became part of a broader conversation about balancing Second Amendment rights with public safety. Mental health awareness also emerged as a critical topic in the aftermath of the Sebring shooting. Xavier's actions highlighted the dangers of untreated mental illness, particularly when combined with access to firearms. His history of social isolation, fascination with violence, and erratic behavior raised questions about how such warning signs could go unnoticed or unaddressed. In response, mental health organizations in Florida and across the country launched campaigns to promote early intervention and reduce the stigma associated with seeking help. Schools and workplaces began offering more resources for mental health support, recognizing that proactive measures could save lives. The families of the victims played an important role in shaping the legacy of the shooting. Despite their grief, many of them chose to channel their pain into advocacy and community-building efforts. They established scholarships, charities, and outreach programs in honor of their loved ones, ensuring that their memories would live on in ways that made a positive difference. For example, funds were created to support local students pursuing higher education, reflecting the values and aspirations of the women who were lost. These initiatives not only honored the victims but also helped the community heal by turning tragedy into a force for good. The Sebring shooting also had a profound impact on the criminal justice system's approach to dealing with mass violence. Law enforcement agencies conducted a thorough review of their response to the incident, identifying strengths and areas for improvement. The swift response of local police on the day of the shooting was widely praised, but the standoff with Xavier raised questions about how to better handle situations involving armed suspects. As a result, police departments in Florida and beyond began implementing new training programs focused on de-escalation and crisis intervention. For the Sebring community, the legacy of the shooting was both a source of pain and a catalyst for resilience. The tragedy underscored the fragility of life and the importance of coming together to support one another. Churches, civic organizations, and local leaders worked tirelessly to provide resources for those affected, including counseling services, financial assistance, and community events aimed at fostering unity. These efforts helped many residents begin the long and difficult process of healing, even as the memory of that fateful day remained fresh in their minds. At a broader level, the Sebring shooting contributed to a growing awareness of the interconnected nature of societal challenges, such as gun violence, mental health, and social isolation. It served as a stark reminder that addressing these issues requires a multifaceted approach involving not just law enforcement but also educators, healthcare providers, policymakers, and community members. The tragedy became a call to action for individuals and organizations dedicated to creating a safer and more compassionate society. Despite the progress made in the years since the shooting, the pain of the loss remains a constant presence for the families and friends of the victims. Their grief is a testament to the depth of the connections they shared with their loved ones, and their resilience serves as an inspiration to others facing similar challenges. The memory of Cynthia Watson, Marisol Lopez, Deborah Cook, Anna Pignon Williams, and Jessica Montague continues to live on through the efforts of those who refuse to let their stories be forgotten. In the end, the legacy of the Sebring bank shooting is one of both sorrow and strength. It is a reminder of the profound impact that acts of violence can have on individuals, families, and communities. But it is also a testament to the human capacity for compassion and healing. As the Sebring community moves forward, the lessons learned from this tragedy continue to shape efforts to build a safer and more united future. In the wake of the Sebring bank shooting and the conviction of Zefan Zaver, the community, the victims' families, and even those far removed from the tragedy were left grappling with a shared question: how can healing begin, and how can such senseless violence be prevented in the future? Justice, while delivered in the form of Xavier's death sentence, could never truly fill the void left by the loss of 5 innocent lives. Yet the aftermath of the tragedy offered an opportunity for reflection, action, and the pursuit of a safer, more compassionate society. For the families of the victims, healing was a deeply personal and often excruciatingly slow process. Losing a loved one to violence brings a unique kind of grief, compounded by the knowledge of how their lives ended. Many family members struggled with feelings of anger, sorrow, and even guilt, wondering if there was anything they could have done to prevent the tragedy. Counseling and therapy became essential for many, offering a space to process their emotions and begin to rebuild their lives. Local and national organizations provided support, including groups specifically for survivors of violence, where families could connect with others who understood their pain. One way families found solace was through memorializing their loved ones. Public vigils and private ceremonies were held to honor the lives of Cynthia Watson, Marisol Lopez, Deborah Cook, Anna Pignon Williams, and Jessica Montague. Scholarships were established in their names, ensuring that their legacies would live on by supporting the dreams and aspirations of young people in the community. Memorial plaques and benches were placed around Sebring, serving as quiet reminders of the women who were lost but never forgotten. These acts of remembrance helped transform grief into purpose, creating positive impacts that reflected the values of the victims. For the Sebring community, the road to healing was intertwined with a commitment to resilience and unity. The town had always been known for its close-knit atmosphere, and the tragedy brought its residents even closer together. Churches, civic organizations, and local leaders organized events to foster solidarity, including community gatherings, charity drives, and discussions about safety and mental health. These efforts created spaces where residents could share their feelings, support one another, and collectively work toward recovery. At the same time, the Sebring shooting sparked important conversations about the societal factors that contribute to acts of mass violence. One of the most pressing issues was mental health, particularly the lack of accessible resources for individuals struggling with severe emotional and psychological challenges. Zefan Zaver's history of isolation and fascination with violence underscored the need for earlier intervention and better support systems. Mental health professionals and advocates pushed for increased funding and awareness campaigns, aiming to reduce stigma and encourage people to seek help before reaching a breaking point. Schools, workplaces, and community centers began offering more resources, such as counseling services and mental health education programs, to address the issue proactively. The tragedy also reignited debates about gun control and public safety. Zaver had legally purchased the firearm used in the attack, despite exhibiting behaviors that many believed should have disqualified him from owning a weapon. Advocates for gun reform called for stricter background checks, waiting periods, and red flag laws that would allow authorities to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed a threat to themselves or others. While these discussions often revealed deep divides in public opinion, they also highlighted a shared desire to prevent future tragedies. For law enforcement and first responders, the Sebring shooting became a case study in crisis management and response. While the rapid arrival of police likely prevented further loss of life, the incident revealed areas for improvement, such as strategies for negotiating with armed suspects and ensuring the safety of hostages. Police departments across Florida and beyond implemented new training programs focused on active shooter scenarios, emphasizing de-escalation and coordination with mental health professionals. These changes aimed to equip officers with the tools they needed to respond more effectively to similar situations in the future. On a broader level, the Sebring tragedy prompted reflection on the cultural and societal factors that contribute to violence. Experts pointed to issues such as social isolation, toxic masculinity, and the glorification of violence in media as underlying contributors that often go unaddressed. Community leaders and educators began working to create environments where individuals felt valued and supported, fostering a sense of belonging that could counteract feelings of alienation. Anti-bullying initiatives, mentorship programs, and youth engagement activities gained traction, offering young people positive outlets and role models. The legacy of the Sebring shooting also extended to the victims' families, many of whom became advocates for change. Despite their grief, they found strength in working to prevent similar tragedies. Some spoke publicly about their experiences, sharing their stories to raise awareness about gun violence, mental health, and the importance of community support. Others lobbied for legislative changes or partnered with organizations dedicated to addressing the root causes of mass violence. Their efforts ensured that the memory of their loved ones would serve as a catalyst for meaningful action. For those directly affected by the tragedy, healing was a deeply personal journey that often defied timelines or easy resolutions. Many found comfort in small acts of kindness, the support of friends and neighbors, and the knowledge that they were not alone in their grief. The scars of the Sebring shooting would never fully fade, but the resilience of the victims' families and the community as a whole demonstrated the power of human connection in the face of unimaginable loss. Ultimately, the Sebring bank shooting left a legacy that was both tragic and transformative. It highlighted the fragility of life and the devastating impact of unchecked violence, but it also revealed the strength of a community united by compassion and a shared commitment to change. The lessons learned from the tragedy continue to shape efforts to build a safer, more empathetic society, ensuring that the memory of the 5 women who were lost will never be forgotten. Their stories serve as a reminder of the importance of addressing the root causes of violence and supporting one another in times of need, leaving a lasting impact that reaches far beyond the boundaries of Sebring.